They call it television programming because that is exactly what it does. It does not merely reflect culture. It trains culture to recognize what is normal, admirable, shameful, or unthinkable. The lesson rarely arrives as a command. It comes through characters who are funny, lovable, wounded, attractive, or familiar. Ask what you are being trained to approve, excuse, desire, fear, or despise. Television attaches emotion to ideas. It rewards one conviction with belonging and turns another into the joke. Then repetition goes to work. The audience laughs, sympathizes, returns, and watches society treat the message as normal. The conscience that first objected begins questioning itself. What was shocking becomes sympathetic, familiar, then expected. Eventually, resistance is portrayed as immoral. And even when productions lose money, the same cultural direction keeps returning. Profit may not be the only return being pursued. They can lose at the box office and still gain ground inside the culture. A production may fail financially, while its language and moral assumptions become familiar. Maybe the movie is not the real product. Maybe the culture is. News programming uses the same architecture with greater authority. When people trust government, The broadcast becomes their cornerstone. Selection decides what matters. Omission decides what disappears. Repetition decides what feels certain. Framing decides who appears righteous, dangerous, or absurd. Government does not need to own every newsroom. Access, briefings, selective leaks, regulation, and institutional relationships shape what reaches the screen. Why would government need influence inside supposedly independent media unless it wanted to shape what people see, or conceal what they do not? Guard your heart. Ask what the program normalized, what it mocked, and which authority it taught you to trust. Measure it against scripture before it becomes the measure of you. Television does not merely reflect society. Repeated long enough, it rehearses the culture society becomes.
Hello, good evening and welcome to another WEBSTER report on this Sunday, the 2nd of August. So we've gone past the halfway mark of 2026. We're now pushing towards 2027. We have got a big year in 2030. Wonder what's going to be happening round about then. There's a lot of stuff going on at the moment. Maybe there's a bit of programming going on. We've spoke about it in the media before, but it's a little bit more deep-rooted. The media seems to just feather the top surface and make people feel good about the choices in life. What do you think, Alex? How have you been?
Not too bad, Paul. I think I was really impressed with how Andy Burnham has gone to his local rugby club, because he loves to support grassroots rugby with that lovely, genuine smile on his face as he puts himself around and shows what a caring, warm individual that he is. So, yeah, I do believe that there is some programming going on, but of course, it's not Andy Burnham doing that because he's just a good guy.
Well, it's a wrong-shaped ball as well, mate. You know, Andy Burnham doesn't chase eggs. That's why you can tell he's going to be so fickle with what's going on here. When we look at the past week, you know, with Andy's lad, Bev, she's now the official mayor of Manchester. Farage and Rupert Law, well, Rupert Law wants to merge and create something new. I'm not sure if there's anything new here, Paul. You know, are we not just regurgitating the same old rubbish, just in different clothes?
Well, the thing about it is, I saw it earlier with Rupert Law. He's a con artist, and everybody puts him up on a pedestal. But it's obvious what he's doing. I've seen some of his. I saw quite a few comments from people, and people are stupid, generally, unfortunately. So they all think that this is exactly Rupert being the bigger man. But then, even though they're the much smaller party, and they kind of did okay in the Manchester mayoral elections, where there's nothing really at stake. So they got, was it about 8%? Suddenly, he thinks, right, we can make a move. And then he starts saying, yeah, we need to come together. I can put the past behind us, even those terrible things you did to me, Nigel. As long as you acknowledge these 5 red lines. You never see a smaller party dictating to a much bigger established party and talking about a merger. And the point about that is he's doing it to further undermine the reform base because, as I said before, he's a radical populist. So he can say all these things about the death penalty, which should be absolutely draconian and totally unbefitting. The death penalty has no place in a modern society. And what he's doing, he's whipping things up, and he made that one of his conditions. He made another condition, getting rid of all the Tories that he's taken on board. More or less everything that he suggested was not really viable for reform. And yeah, he's there dictating in his nice country gentleman tone. And what he's doing, he's putting Farage over a barrel, making Farage look like the unreasonable one. But if Farage did agree to that nonsense of Rupert Law, it would make them, like he's talking about deportations, tackling the Islamification in a very radical way, you know, Sharia law and all that. Obviously, loads of people are going to go, yes, Christian country, yes, we should do that. But it's just going to make that combined party beyond the pale. No one's turned on Rupert Law at the moment because his establishments. But if Farage went down that path, reform would be completely finished. They're already maligned by all their opponents as a racist far-right party when they're actually quite centre-right now. And they've moved away from Tommy. They've moved away from all Rupert's policies. But Rupert's saying, yeah, you should go far-right. And you know, like I said before, Rupert won't be criticised by the establishment. He's welcomed by the Tories because he's a Tory plant.
Well, this is going to be the big issue then, isn't it? Because we're going off plants. We're going off people who say things that they don't really mean. We're going off a lot of lies. And we've already built our policies, our mansions on falseness.
Yeah.
Well, how can people break this spell? Because we've been so deceived forever. You know, the factor is from when we are spat out into this world and your arse is smacked and you take that first breath. It's lies, 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 lies. Now, if you haven't got the wherewithal within yourself to look for something and it's not given to you, then do you just end up fumbling about in a dark room looking for things, and then you find something and you can feel it and you think, hey, that's this. I know what this is. I'm going to do this. And then when the light comes on, you know, you're holding something that you don't really want to hold. Is this not the same old politics, Alex? Are we not in the dying? Are we not in the death throes of it?
And when people do not know how to take charge of their own life and make a meaningful existence, and they see things disintegrating all around them, and they see economically being taxed and these things are happening, they feel powerless. At the end of the day, when people feel powerless, they'll cling to the life raft that seems to give them an opportunity to stick their head in the sand or not notice what's really going on. People, particularly if people feel like a problem is insoluble, like there's nothing they can do to solve it, they will go into a fantasy mode. They will start to imagine an escapist reality where if my life were like this, or if I was associated with that person, or if I was in a relationship with this person, or I had these needs met, everything would be okay. Or if I had a better job, you know. And unfortunately, that is something that is, you know, we talk about pandemics becoming endemic. Well, that mentality is endemic. It exists in so many people, and because it's reinforced wherever you look, people are tribal. I mean, look at Westminster. Look at Prime Minister's questions. Look at the level, the caliber of politicians. I mean, they're awful.
Awful.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, what can you say? So, effectively, people don't have. I mean, if your average truther, who can, you know, let's face it, people talk about conspiracy theories, but a lot of truthers get into conspiracy theories, not in the sense of knowing what's going on, but they become raging, seeing problems everywhere. But if your average truther who's become conspiratorial in the worst sense is smarter than most politicians you see in Parliament, you have a problem. We know Diane Abbott's in Parliament. But, you know, she's no...
I don't think it's that, Alex. Diane Abbott, right? I think she practices at being that dim. I really do. I think it's an art, because I think that they laugh at people so much behind that parliamentary privilege where I can tell you a load of bollocks and with a big smile on my face, and then I do nothing of what I've said I will do. I don't do anything, and you lot don't care. You'll just go, oh, rah, 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 rah. You know, it's like being in Parliament. Where's my piece of paper, Alex? that I can wave in the air and go, rah, 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 because that's where we're at. That's where we're at. We live in an economy that is debt-based. So therefore, the people are now creditors, because if we don't get up and go out and do the work for the nation, there is no credit. So the creditors are based on the people. The factor is, in the debt-based economy, creditors shouldn't pay gas, water and electric bills, and they shouldn't be paying council tax unless they run a business. So once we've established that those utilities and the council tax are only applicable to commercial use, then people should be going, hang on a minute. But that's not what we've got, Alex. We've got people who go, oh, my council tax has gone up too much. Oh, I'm paying for ambulances. Oh, I'm paying for... No, that's not what you're paying for. The shops, business rates, council tax pay for the shops to have those services. You've already paid for them. National insurance, income tax, graft. You've already set this up because this is the system that you've agreed to. But, oh, hang on a minute. I didn't agree to this. Let me opt out. Well, opting out of the system that you've paid into, that your generations have paid into, and not taking what you're entitled to, where does that leave us? Where does it leave us? We're saying we've done all this, but we're going to walk away. Well, that's like paying for my council tax that pays for my local parks to be maintained by the council. But once I pay that tax, I go, don't bother. I've got a friends group of my park. So near me, Lilford Park, Friends of Lilford Park, paid all our council tax, maintain our parks. Don't bother. We'll go maintain them ourselves. And I'm like, in what reality does that make sense? I'll pay somebody to do that job, but once I've paid them, I'm going to go and do that job myself. They have trained us, they have groomed us really well.
Yeah, I mean, we'll never get away from that, and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. But I do think that it's always been that there've been one or two decent politicians. They're a dying breed. I mean, Martin says in the chat here about reform needing to announce some actual policies. Exactly correct. So that's the good thing to take from what Rupert Lover suggested, that their policy light, and that. So that's a good recognition. And then he mentions policies, not people, as Tony Benn likes to say. So Tony Benn, again, he had a political philosophy. He used to stand up and do what the job description said, which was debate dispassionately the points of policy for the best interest of the country. Virtually no politician does that because they've all been co-opted into this tribalism, and it's all about who shouts the loudest, who's got the most clout to form the policies, and then you can disseminate that through the media and create a cosmetic image. So here's where you have the problem. Now, personally, I think now a lot of people don't like him, but for me, the only realistic politician who I actually really genuinely like is Jacob Rees-Mogg. And the reason for that is, even though he's considered classically to be a toff, you can see that when he's interviewed and he does his own show, Mogg clearly tries to do a dispassionate analysis. He's a classical Tory, and he understands the basic political philosophy and the economics. I don't think he'd make, and he said it himself, he's not charismatic enough to make a figurehead prime minister, but that's a good thing, because people like him give me hope. You know, he'll talk to people like David Starkey, you know, the historian. He'll talk about people who actually think. And I think we've got to rebuild a broad-based consensus in political philosophy where people used to stand up in Parliament beyond this partisan rubbish. And you saw that when Starmer resigned, and it was a loving from everybody. You could see they're all in the same club. And maybe you could say that.
Let me just interject. It's funny you say they're all in the same club. Because straight away, the photograph of Mogg being fast asleep on the benches in Parliament comes to mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's nothing to stimulate a genuinely smart bloke like Mogg. What I like about Mogg is he would talk to a working class person with respect. He wouldn't look down his nose at them. And he would probably think that some of the things that they say and do are a bit uncouth, but he'll just call that out in his usual style. He'll not go overboard. He's not a prejudiced, snotty person. Might be a little bit out of touch in some ways, but even he recognises that his lifestyle and his privilege puts him somewhat out of touch. But he won't reject somebody who's more in touch. He likes Farage. He knows that Farage has a lot to offer the current setup, but he knows it's not perfect, and he acknowledges the mistakes that Farage makes. So the problem is we don't have enough people like Jacob Rees-Mogg. And I actually think, for all people who've criticised him, I personally think Robert Jenrick is being set up eventually to replace Farage. I think if they feel they could rehabilitate him enough, he'd probably be a decent future leader, because he has actually stood up, put his head above the parapet and taken some hits. And, you know, if we suggest that all politicians are the same and they can't change, from a Christian point of view, you know, we're not taking seriously the fact that God himself can turn people around. And while some people pretend to turn around, you know, not everybody turns around at the same rate of knots. Like, some people just become awake. If you think about the number of people who listened to the show at one time were asleep, they want to know that 9/11, you know, was a convenient cover story, shall we say. So eventually, at some point, the dots don't add up, and people can change. And I believe that somebody like Jenrick, even though he was a political, you know, he's a career politician, I do believe he shows the potential. I think, yeah, like Zahawi, who rolled out the vaccines, I just think he's a slimeball and he shouldn't have been brought into reform. But Jenrick, I can see a couple of other cases as well. So to me, we're dealing with the best case scenario that we can get is trying to get the few decent people who are left in there to get together, and maybe also try and change media, because I think media is the big problem. I think that's what Rupert Law was actually trying to do. I don't actually mind Rupert in some ways. If he'd have said to Nigel, you know, rather than "these are our 5 red lines," if he'd have just said, we need to talk about a bit more of a radical agenda because reform have compromised too much. Let's open up channels of negotiation. We believe there are some things that the British people want. We do believe this is a Christian country. We do need to look at demographics. That's all true. And that's where we've got to fight the leftists who, as soon as we say that in any capacity, we're just racists automatically. No, we're not. So that is a hill people should be prepared to die on. But, you know, Rupert Law is far too prescriptive and extreme. And I think he's still too establishment.
Well, we have seen, though, I mean, Restore and Reform both put decent cases forward for the Mayor of Manchester, but Andy's lad is still taking it. So we've still got people who are voting for Labour. Why? Because my dad did. You know, we've got to start pushing some of these boundaries. So we'll just play this video, Alex, and then we'll talk a bit more about
London, 1884. A group of socialists sit down with a plan that will outlive every one of them. Remake Britain without a revolution. All right, but how? Well, get inside the institutions, influence the people running them, change the country, one law at a time. They called themselves the Fabian Society. Their method was called permeation. Councils, universities, the civil service, parliament. Put your people and ideas where decisions are made. Bring in public ownership and more services run by government, bit by bit. Fabius Maximus was a Roman general known for avoiding the big battle, wearing down his enemy and waiting for the right moment to strike. That's who they named themselves after. Jesus warned in Matthew chapter 7 verse 15, "Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves." 2 years after the society was formed, the Fabians put the same image on one of their own documents: a wolf in sheep's clothing. Yeah, really. In 1895, leading Fabians helped found the London School of Economics. A year later, Sidney Webb wrote about the breeding of degenerate hordes who were unfit for social life, deciding who should have children and who shouldn't. And this wasn't some nutter who came to a meeting. Sidney Webb was one of the most important Fabians who ever lived. By 1900, the society had helped form the Labour Representation Committee, the organisation that became the Labour Party. George Bernard Shaw wrote, "The only fundamental and possible socialism is the socialisation of the selective breeding of man." H.G. Wells advocated controlling the reproduction of people he considered unfit. And this is where it gets properly dark. Because in 1910, Sidney Webb called for preventing the continued procreation of people he described as feeble-minded and degenerate. His answer? Interfere, interfere, interfere. Just let that sink in. The same political circle arguing that the state should care for people throughout their lives was also arguing that the state should interfere with who was allowed to reproduce. Around 1910, the wolf appeared again in the Fabian window. George Bernard Shaw and Sidney Webb are shown hammering the world on an anvil beneath the words, "Remold it nearer to the heart's desire." And above them, the wolf in sheep's clothing. By the 1930s, Sidney and Beatrice Webb were praising Stalin's Soviet Union as a new civilization. Famine, forced collectivization, political repression, the purges, the gulag. Millions were starving, imprisoned, or dead, while the Webbs presented the Soviet system as progress. They dismissed reports of millions dying in the famine as fantastically excessive. Even in 1942, they wrote, "Stalin is not a dictator." Yeah, course not, mate. They also called the Soviet Union the most inclusive and equalized democracy in the world. By 1945, the Fabians had gone from a small group in London to 229 members elected to Parliament, many serving under Clement Attlee. Then the names kept coming: Harold Wilson, James Callaghan, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown. The Society's own history says every Labour Prime Minister has been associated with it. Keir Starmer sat on its elected executive. When Labour won in 2024, the Fabian Society said Starmer and more than half his shadow cabinet were Fabian members. Its annual report also said the Society had helped shape Labour's manifesto before it entered government. Rachel Reeves and David Lammy declared Fabian membership while serving in Starmer's cabinet. The Society names Angela Rayner and Ed Miliband as prominent Fabians. Sadiq Khan was Fabian chair and is now one of its vice presidents. Their accounts name Meta, Lloyd's Banking Group, Maximus, the government contractor involved in DWP health and disability assessments, UNICEF, RUSI, insurers, trade unions. They say funders can't dictate what gets published. All right, and funding doesn't prove that any policy was bought. but fund the report, sponsor the conference, put your issue in front of MPs, advisors, and future ministers before the public even knows the argument has started. Money gets you into the conversation. That's how influence works in Westminster. The door to influencing policy is wide open. And now Andy Burnham is Prime Minister. He wrote for a Fabian Labour leadership pamphlet and appeared at their events for years. Around him sit Angela Rayner, Ed Miliband, and Wes Streeting, their former vice chair. At least 12 people still serving as ministers had formally declared Fabian membership before the reshuffle. And that doesn't include every senior figure who held Fabian office, worked for the society, wrote for it, or repeatedly appeared on its platforms. And the mad bit? It's all public. The history, the members, the funders, the route into government. For more than 140 years, the same method has kept working. Get inside the institutions, build the network, wait. So remember Christ's warning. The wolf puts on the fleece, walks through the front door, takes a seat at the table, and by the time anybody looks up, is helping write the rules. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more long-form content like this,
I think that video says a lot, that, Alex, that I know people certainly that have voted for those new people that have just been outed there, that they are part of this society that is so deep-rooted that they want their effects. Now, does that mean that the Conservatives have been completely against this Fabian society? That's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I doubt it. But it's tough. It's tough whenever you get into this type of arena because, like, we started off with this idea about wolf in sheep's clothing, which was associated with false prophets. And the problem is, when we talk about false prophets, particularly when we feel like they're in the majority and they're in control, the fear ramps up. So the problem is, do we think it's best to try and expose and get rid of false prophets who've got a strong control, or that we develop true prophets? Because for me, what we need to do in all this inauthenticity, with all these fake voices and all these fake people listening to these fake voices who are tribal and emotionally driven and ideologically saturated, they don't know that they're starving for authentic truth and reality. So to me, that's where the Christian message in particular and discipleship, if God's message about building a kingdom of disciples who are the real deal, if that kind of reality could still exist today with real people speaking truth, authentic. That's why I talked about Mog. I know Paul in the chat said, like Mog, and like threw his hands up in despair with question marks, but it's not about Mog being some, incredible human being. It's caliber wise compared to what we see most of the time in politics. There's no political philosophy. There are no people standing up for truth. There are no people standing up for the objective correctness of a policy. Nobody really standing up for the best interests of this country, who the politicians are there to represent. At least with Mog, he does the analysis of the actual policies, what the priority should be, what a political philosophy should involve. Those questions don't even get onto the table most of the time. It's just pure theatre. So until we can get a high caliber of truth teller, like Tony Benn classically, like Martin was talking about, Tony Benn was respected right across the board. He was a proper politician. And no matter what people think about Enoch Powell, because of his views being considered right-wing, a proper politician who spoke his mind, regardless of... Anne Widdecombe, again, somebody, no matter what you thought of her, from a left perspective, was a woman who spoke her mind. She had values. That people criticised her. Catholic Christianity is over the top and moralistic. But She actually had values and principles and stood for them and spoke her mind clearly. And she's just been bumped off openly in her own home. So it just looks to me like the nefarious forces are trying to clean up any last vestiges of truth telling and clear voices. And instead, we're getting Andy Burnham, hail fellow, well met. Look at him. Oh, man of the people, everybody loves him. And Andy's riding in on his white stallion. And how long have people been alive not to see through? That's just cosmetic, it's theatre. But people love it. And next thing you know, they get momentum. So-called the polls, if they're not fixed. Now Labour are above reform again. Next thing you know, you get a Labour mayor in when there was an opportunity in the Northwest to experiment with getting some proper policies in to deal with the actual problems. Nope, we double down and the people vote for Labour again. So you just think, unfortunately, the establishment is full of polarised people who are all, basically shallow, and there's a very few examples of people with calibre. So the answer to me is not, you can lament the situation all you like, it's not going to change. These people are not going to voluntarily say, oh, I'll tell you what, let's start getting real again and doing politics properly, and let's really start advocating for this country, because it's not in their best interest. They're advocating for themselves. My wallet is my country, my prestige, my reputation, my career prospects are my country. So it's going to take the truth tellers, the people with integrity, but, the message is very clear. Say it too loud, say it too clearly, and you might get bumped off. So we're in a perilous situation.
If we're in a powerless situation, then
Perilous.
if we're powerless, then are we sat in on lifeboats watching the Titanic / Olympic sink, or can we do anything? Can we change anything?
Yeah, like I said, the only thing we can change is ultimately ourselves. So, I was thinking earlier, I had a conversation with AI, which I do sometimes. And obviously I've been writing these books and refining my perspective. For a second, I thought, what would happen if I got up and, say, I decided to become a politician and I tried to get into Parliament, say, just as a thought experiment. And, I've done a lot of work with this AI and it knows me well. So it more or less said, you would be good in a lot of those roles behind the scenes when you've got these committees and all the think tank related stuff, and actually your skills would be recognised there. But in anything to do with being an MP, anything where that cosmetic stuff is, you would just appear to be an alien to them. They wouldn't be able to criticise a lot of your views because you're dispassionate and objective, but they wouldn't understand you and you wouldn't get any traction. So it is very difficult to imagine how even the most objective person who could make a really good case would get anywhere in Parliament. So at that level, we ain't going to change those visible high-profile roles, but there are a lot of behind-the-scenes roles, and there are modes of influence. We can become leaders in our families, in our neighbourhoods. That's not very glamorous, is it? Because people want quick solutions. They're obsessed with quick solutions, but we need slow burn. But it needs to start now, and people need to be stepping up and exercising leadership. But that people still think that the answer is in politics.
Well, I've had a conversation with a lad I've known for a long time. He set up a talk that I did called Real Change Leads, and he wants people to actively engage back in to voting, because he believes that when we get the vote won, we can then change law and we can change legislation. Whereas I can't see anybody, even if all the people get it right, whoever we vote in aren't going to do that. I can't speak to politicians or even local councillors who say they understand what a debt-based economy is. They understand that these people are creditors and they shouldn't be paying bills. Council tax isn't applicable to any property that isn't commercially related. But because of how we've been taught, there's a lot of presumption that is allowed. So because of property being registered and how it's been registered, it can be capable of commercial. So if we don't say anything and we just presume that it is, then we enter into a courtroom in commercial capacity and we speak to Mr. Smith. If Mr. Smith doesn't realise that he's in commercial capacity, it's nothing to do with us. We just carry on. Now, Mr. Smith also votes. So Mr. Smith, as the creditor, is voting for people to have rule over him without knowing what the rules are. And that's what we've all done. So again, we're moving the deck chairs on the Olympic. We're moving them round as it's sinking. We're listening to the people play the right songs. Come on, let's be uplifted, yay! But there's nothing happening. And I don't know if that is down to really good propaganda. I don't mean a company having a really good look at something, or stupidity, or a bit of both. I just don't get it because my mind doesn't work like this. And that's why everybody attacks. Because I've got to be wrong, because if I'm right, that means people will have to actually do something in their lives, Alex, and not just put an X on a piece of paper and say, he'll sort it, she'll sort it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there are specific actions that we call remedies that would, if they were implemented, correct things at a structural level through, judiciary and political structures, legislation, and correcting things and developing honest brokers at the surface level. That would work to a degree. It would provide the immediate and obvious remedy or correction to the things that are wrong. But I don't believe that the evil and the confusion and the chaos that we see in the human condition is just down to bad policies caused by people with an agenda for fraud and control. Because if we say that, it's too easy to have a bunch of people who are the evil ones, and they're evil because they do that, but I'm good because I don't do that. It's like it's a form of identity politics again. So the problem for me goes deeper. Everybody is embedded in culture. So every person in, say, England, let's forget the rest of the UK, is embedded in a culture. Now, is that English culture? Descriptively, it is. If you're a part of the culture and you're English, then you're a part of English culture. But that's the very passive, low-key descriptor of what that is. You basically participate on virtue of being English, existing in this country and doing stuff. Now, that's not very broad.
It's a description on a piece of paper or legislation what an Englishman is or what to be English is. There's no culture left because it was all slightly eroded and molded into something different well before we got to this argument. Paul in the chat room said there can't be a bill unless you have contracted for a service. Gas, water, electric all come to my house. Now, I got contracted for those services, but I paid for them. I paid for them because I've grafted and I've been taxed. So I don't pay for them again. So the factor is I haven't contracted for those services in the fact that I've got an electric contract or a gas contract. I've contracted because I've done my job. I paid me dues. That's what I've done. I paid me dues. So now these are my benefits. These are my entitlements. So I don't pay for gas, water, and electric again because you've already taken money for it and you've already pumped it, serviced, and maintained it. But Dave's bought a shop down the road. He needs to pay. That's how simple this is.
Yeah.
You can't make, if you want to make this more complicated, that means you are stupid because you don't understand what this system is. The Babylon system is meant to be for you to participate in, but we don't participate in it. We just are ruled by it. So when the people rise up and say, no, not fight, not throw stones, not do anything like that, just say, no, hang on. You're charging me a tax called council tax, and it applies to commercial property. And the High Court ruling by Judge Fordham says that the property is capable. Well, that means there's a presumption somewhere. Where's the presumption? It's got to be at the title. So we need to clear these things up. That wouldn't mean people need to participate. But that would mean people need to grow up, Alex.
Well, yeah, but for me, the point is that we're coming back again to remedy. Remedy is important. So my point about culture is, in English culture, is that even if people don't get that, and those things need to be corrected through the right channels, which is remedy, remedy is a part of what should be put right within the institutions, within the structures, legally, and then that should all trickle down. It should filter down to everybody's improved quality of life. That needs to be addressed. But apart from that, there are other aspects of culture, but people don't build culture. And if they only focus on remedy and the legal aspect of stuff, these people could get all that stuff right, on principle, and still be retards, who basically are very selfish, who look after number one, but they do those things that are right in those areas, but then they don't contribute to culture in other ways. They don't develop things like art and beauty. They don't develop wisdom in the culture. We don't form people. Like discipleship from a Christian point of view builds character. If we only look at it at the formal level of our institutions and remedy, then we're missing a large part of what we need as well, which is we need to build better quality people who think, people who've got critical skills, applied to areas outside of remedy. How do I build culture? How do I build community? How do I build relationships? If people are able to conduct relationships so that they don't break down like marriages, then the level of wisdom and ability to flourish in life is drastically compromised. A lot of other things don't matter either. So I think we've got to take a very broad-based view of what culture is. Again, people talk about the culture war. People talk about Islamification over against the Christian values, high trust culture. Yes, that's the part of it, but it's on a macro level. You can have good Muslims and dodgy Muslims. You can have good Christians. You can have dodgy Christians. You can even have dodgy Buddhists, dodgy Jews and good Jews. So it's a people-related issue. We've got to build a culture, whether that's connected with religion and spirituality and faith or outside of it. You can be an atheist, you can be an ethical, principled person who doesn't believe that a God exists, and you can still contribute to the culture. So we've got to get out of our silos, and we've got to take seriously that we're all responsible for this culture. We're all stakeholders in the culture, but we're stakeholders in our families, in our communities, in the pubs and clubs that we go down to, and the way we conduct ourselves there, and the way that we build life there, and the conversations that we have there are the heartbeats of everything, and that's what's missing. So the Reconstruction Project transcends politics by a country mile. It transcends remedy by a country mile. It's about the caliber of people, just like it's about the caliber of politicians who just happen to be people. It's the caliber of people that's missing. The church should have produced disciples, part of the kingdom of God from a theological point of view, who had that quality. Jesus said, you are the light of the world, you are the salt of the earth. If salt loses its saltiness, what good is it than to be thrown and trampled underfoot? It's supposed to add flavour, it's supposed to add character. When that's missing, the whole of society loses. But if it's missing, we don't go, oh, it's terrible, it's missing, can we not get it back? You can only build with your own two hands where you are now. If you're talking about how crap the world is, and you're in conflict with your neighbour, you're in a dispute with them over something petty, and then you go, well, it's because it's because we've not got a remedy in this area. That, well, yes, but also no. It's that, and it's what you're not doing. You're not building camaraderie. You're not building the positive with your neighbours. You're not building your community. You're saying pass. You're letting politicians take control of it all because you're too lazy to do anything about it. So it all comes down to our convictions, our values, and whether we actually want to work at ourselves and look at ourselves. And that's a big part of it as well.
People don't, well, they want to point at people and say, you do it, man. You do this. You said you're an MP. You said you're a councillor. So you do it. And that's where we lose. Because the people that do want to do things for the people don't get anywhere. And that is why when I speak to councillors, my local councillors, I could name them, and I've sat with them and I've said, we're in a debt-based economy. Your constituents are creditors, and they agree. I went, well, creditors don't pay bills. Debtors pay bills. Debtors mean you're a business owner or you have business revenue. You can't tax a property that has no revenue coming through it. You said you had a chat with GPT. I had a chat with Gemini, who kept telling me that Section 3 of the Local Government Finance Act says that you can apply tax to a non-commercial property. And I went, how can you do that if there's no revenue? And Gemini couldn't give me that answer because there has to be business revenue. There has to be a business for you to take a tax from. Because if you knock on my private house and say you owe me money, you better have a signed agreement or contract to show that there's any property that's been negotiated between us. If you can't, then there is no claim. And yet, we are having people operating on liability orders that have no authority, that aren't orders from any court, but they're operating on it on a business administrative point of view. What does that mean? That means that the house that they're operating against is a shop on paper. So we have to take responsibility of these jurisdictions. Giving it to a politician who has MP after them, which is a named business, where else can you go? You're being dragged straight in to the same. That is why now we're only being pushed towards civil unrest, because people will not know what to do when you bring the truth. It doesn't matter that there's fraud or anything that's going on if you don't know. But when you point out that there's fraud there, fraud there, fraud there, fraud there, and they can only point back to you and say, yeah, but you said, you know, we're saying this house is a shop because of how you've registered it. Ignorance of the law is no excuse, Alex.
Yeah.
So
Well,
we just keep going. We just keep going. We keep going with the same idiocy. You know, my mum and dad taught me this, but my dad knew there was something wrong. My mum just said, this is life, you just got to get on with it. Well, when you write, and life shouldn't just be got on with because it needs dealing with, you need other people to see that. We're struggling to have people to see it because they're arguing and defending under Stockholm Syndrome what their abusers have done to them.
Yeah. And I would hope that over time, if we can put these other elements, or if we can rectify to a degree. But again, the problem is it's going to take time. Now, I think last week it was that Taylor made a very good point. He becomes somewhat disillusioned by the movement, if you like, and he was hoping his investment was longer term, that the generation of younger people coming through were alive to this. So you're talking about generational change over the next 15 years or so. Now, whether we've got time for that is an interesting question, but it does seem as if this world were to continue and we didn't have our apocalyptic return of Christ scenario feeling imminent for a lot of Christians, then you would say if it just carried on and he didn't come back, that you'd be looking at maybe the next generation within 10 to 15 years making a difference. So there's not going to be any quick fix, that's for sure. And in this country, obviously, I mean, we've seen some of the stuff that Reform have done just in some of the local councils. If we could have got a Reform mayor in, then again, we would have been able to start seeing policies implemented that cleaned up Manchester, that started to reverse the insane policies that all the leftist morons all subscribe to because they're stupid. And ultimately, that's not going to happen.
Do you think Reform, Restore, do you think they would be receptive to the Fabian stuff of what Labour has put out and understand that their whole ethos is to undermine the entire civilization? Are they on board or are they against that, would you think?
No. So the Fabian Society is merely an outworking of a human tendency that's always been in place. So it's what we'd say is an instantiation, if you're a philosopher. It's a concrete instantiation of a set of strategies that you might see in Sun Tzu's Art of War, going back, 5-6 centuries before Christ. What do you need to do strategically and politically under your power to maintain competitive advantage over the people that you are competing with? It's an entirely rational strategy for people to protect what they perceive to be their interests by engaging in some form of intrigue. Now, that's why Jesus said about the sons of the kingdom versus, the sons of this world, that the sons of the kingdom are naive. He says to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. So Jesus himself was pragmatic enough for all his Son of God status to acknowledge that there was a naivety and purity of principle, which means that many people of faith and purity like that refuse to use those tactics. But that puts you at a competitive disadvantage because your opponents, who are all fighting for a piece of, land, territory, control, power, they are using those methods. So the Fabian Society is simply, when it was set up, was attempting to secure the ends of certain vested interests. It doesn't have to be Fabian. So Reform and Restore could acknowledge objectively that if it wasn't just fashionable to slate the Fabians, that what the Fabians tried to do was secure the long-term interest of their vision and try and perpetuate that ideology. That doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just people competing to achieve their interests.
So should we say that Labour is the wolf in the sheep's clothing, Restore is what? The scorpion in sheep's clothing, Restore is the lion in sheep's clothing, because they're all predators.
Well, Restore is, unfortunately, it's trying to capture Reform voters. Like I said many a time, the only chance for any kind of political change, with some good and some bad in it, the only chance for change of any kind is Reform UK. And
is that without blood being shed?
Yeah, exactly. It's the only peaceful way that you'll get any change. Now, I'm not saying that change is going to be definitively excellent change. There'll be some definite drawbacks, but if they didn't deliver on what they claimed, then there would be a revolution, because too many people have put their last hope in them actually delivering on what they say. Rupert Law, no chance.
No, isn't it? There's the point. We've created enough argument now. Now there's going to be a vote. So they're going to vote for somebody to change something. This is what they've always done. And I think this is why, Alex, that whatever comes from this, it's only going to take us down the same path. And it's at that point, people who said, we told you this had happened, that's when they're going to spit the dummies out. That's when things can start to change. The only thing that I've got here is, Alex, that God is in control of all of this. Jesus, contrary to some popular beliefs, Jesus is reigning now. He's reigned since the cross. Since he rose to the right hand, all authority is in his hands. So what we're seeing a playing out of all these regimes, all these policies, and all the bad has got to come for the good. What side are people going to be on? How effective is the propaganda been? How effective is God's word in your own chest? People know there's something wrong, but they're still going along with stuff. Family and friends I know, they know there's something wrong, but Andy's a good lad. He jogs down the road amongst the people as if he's a normal person. So he must be doing the right thing, mustn't he?
It's idiocracy, isn't it, mate? I mean, that movie was priceless, really. And when things are in a dire state, people will cling to the life raft of even cosmetic. But this is what happens when you're chronically unprepared to deal with. It's like two people in a relationship. If they've both got issues, and let's face it, are there any people that don't have issues, and they don't work on their issues? Invariably, what we see increasingly with marital breakdown and relational breakdown is that it breaks down, and then one party who clearly sees the issues that the other person has simply blames the other person for the breakdown in the relationship and doesn't look at all at any of their contribution. So if you've got people operating at that basic level every day, getting into relationships that are dysfunctional because they're not prepared to look at themselves and just want to blame somebody else, even though that person may carry some faults, then that's the problem. Whether it's at a political level, a personal level, whatever. If people haven't got the ability to reflect on their own life, to set their own goals, to contribute to culture, to build positively with other people, to cooperate with them, then why would we expect that politicians are any different? Why would we expect that footballers and managing directors of big football clubs would not be making decisions based on the same messed up nonsense? Why would we not expect to see the same problems writ large?
Yeah, that's the whole point, isn't it? Because the politicians are the supporters. They want to know what the supporters are cheering about. So they only talk about what the supporters want and what the supporters are cheering about. And then
Exactly.
the other talk about what the other supporters are cheering about, but against what the other supporters are supporting.
Exactly.
So got games. So the only thing that can be done is jubilees, a complete forgiveness, complete start again. And society is not formulated for that. We have to be better than something before. And yet everything that has been before has been the same thing. So it doesn't matter if it's Labour, Conservative, Restore, Reform. They all say what we want to hear, but when they get in, they do nothing different. Andy Burnham is only running on the same thing as Starmer is running, but they've got a different face. They've got King of the North in the South, and he's obviously not going to keep up what the Labour manifesto said, is he, Alex? He won't. He'll go against the Labour manifesto because he's Andy. He's an ordinary, thoroughly bloody good, nice bloke who jogs down the East Lancs to watch an Everton game, isn't he? Isn't he one of these men of the people? No, is he bollocks? You've got to. There's got to be some kind of retardedness in somebody's brain to not accept that there's something not right here. I've always accepted something not right. I always accepted there's nothing I could do. But I always knew there was nothing right about this. But then you look to all the... I mean, I've seen quite a few Margaret Thatcher speeches from the early 80s, right? She isn't half going against what we're going through, mate. She doesn't half speak against it. And yet, what was her greatest achievement in office? New Labour. Wow. Don't tell me these people do not all piss in the same pot and drink it, lap it up, bathe in it. Of course they do. But what are we going to do to stop that? Is it going to be to participate in the system? If you throw your hat in the ring with people who can get into number 10, even create a number 10 in the north, then I don't think you're winning. I think you're losing. But I know who's in charge of this. And I know that the bad has got to come for the good. But which side are you going to go on? This isn't a voting thing for me, Alex, anymore.
No, well, it isn't. And, you know, I don't like keep going on about it. But, you know, all my current writing is about ecology, and not just the ecology of snails and slugs in a certain environmental setting. And you've got a discipline that appeared in the late 80s to early 90s called restoration ecology, which looked at what happens when certain species get wiped out. So even, you know, in this country, a lot of people know about Himalayan balsam, which is colonized riparian pathways by the sides of rivers. It leads to erosion of soil. It can lead to increased flooding. It chokes out other native plants, and it's everywhere. And you know, some local environmental voluntary groups go balsam bashing like they used to go rhododendron bashing, because it's an invasive. It was brought over in the mid-19th century as an ornamental garden plant that would, you know, be as attractive as maybe an orchid, but it just got out and it's been invasive. Now, it has some positive properties as well, especially for bumblebees and honeybees that are endangered. And it has a certain impact on the soil, which is quite interesting as well. So in any ecology, if you try and restore that ecology by getting rid of an invasive species, you could try and wipe it out, which is very difficult. If it was an insect, you could bring other insects in to try and get rid of them, but that would create other ecological problems. So realistically, what we're looking at here to have real restoration is we need to find an ecological foundation. And I don't just mean like biological ecology, I mean social and cultural ecology. We need to create conditions that are conducive to healthy growth. That's an experiment. But again, it starts with us. So you might not have a blueprint for a laboratory experiment you can set up, but you can decide, you know, what do I believe is important ecologically in my family, in my community, my locality. If you go to a church, in my church, you can fight for that. You can make the case for that. You can open your mouth for that. You can eat, sleep, breathe, and drink that. Those are the only things I think that we can still do. And then, of course, people of a fair perspective can pray and be determined and work hard at that. But most people, again, they're looking for easy solutions. So we've got to a tipping point for sure in our culture where we do need restoration. It must be ecological, not ideological. Most people are tribal. They're choosing camps for ease. They're choosing camps to get a feel-good buzz. You see it in politics. You see it in football and sport. You see it in spirituality and religion, New Age movement. It's all about the gong bath, the sound bath, creating a vibration, feeling good. It's all about entertainment. None of it's about responsibility. None of it's about doing the hard yards. And we know Jesus talked about the cost of discipleship. Take up your cross daily and follow me. You'll be persecuted. You'll have problems in this world. Most people don't want problems. Most people want an easy life. But easy life basically means you don't work hard for anything. You don't appreciate things. So a bit of struggle isn't bad. You know, but again, people now think that the antidote to these challenges and problems is for somebody else to come along and wipe the bottom for them. And I don't know how we're going to undermine that mentality. If we don't come back to responsibility, if we don't come back to an ecological view, so if you don't look at ecology, just talk about responsibility, people become moralistic, they become superior, they go, well, if I was Prime Minister, I'd do this and the world would be a much better place if everyone thought like me. You see, there's nothing ecological about that. It's just ego. Even if the person's correct about a lot of the principles, they'll just set up a system that forces all of the life forms to conform to their theory. Well, that's becomes tyranny. If you impose like communism doesn't have totally bad principles. The problem with communism is like with all ideologies, when you impose them on other people, you take away the freedom. How do you preserve freedom? Well, you give people choice. If you give people a deranged culture and a functional culture, most people will choose the functional culture. But we don't see functional cultures, we see dysfunctional cultures. So people are deranged in their ability to make choices. They don't even know how to make healthy choices anymore. That's virtually catastrophic, because how are we going to get back? How are we going to restore sufficiently so people can see straight and go, oh, this is better than this, actually. It benefits more people.
That's a thing to what Taylor's always been talking about, because the natural citizenship, I mean, Taylor will say the norm is, and they are stupid and they seem to go down this path. So, I mean, Taylor's been with us all night. He's been listening to us waffle on. What's your take on this, Taylor?
Well, first of all, let me just say, you guys like to prattle on and on and on. That's for sure.
Whoa, 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 whoa! We don't prattle, mate. We don't prattle.
Yes, yes,
No,
you do.
We don't prattle. We don't prattle. We debate. No.
I mean,
If you would like to
here's the
become
thing.
mental, Taylor, what's your take on it?
Well, let me just put it this way.
First of all,
yeah, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
you did at the start.
I'll just put it this way, though. If you think that you're going to be able to change the world, or if you think that anything that you think is going to be able to change anything other than yourself, then you're delusional. And I say that to everybody.
Hang on. That's an interesting point, that, Taylor. That's a very interesting point.
Oh my God!
I'll let the vehicles go past your house first. But that's that's an interesting point. That does it matter if you only change yourself? That changes your frequency, your reality. Does it change what you input as well as output?
It can. It depends on what you do. It depends on what you consume. It depends on how you interact with the world. It really depends on that. But at the end of the day, you can only affect yourself and what you give out. You cannot affect anyone else. You cannot change anyone else's beliefs. You cannot. Essentially, I'm just going to put it to you this way, and I'm going to be blunt about it. There's nothing that you can do in order to change people's thoughts, or change the system, or let alone the culture or politics or anything else. So I know that sounds bleak, but it's realistic. It's just how the world works. All you can do is just worry about yourself and the people that you care about, not in the way where you want to change their thoughts, but in the way where you just want to just get along to get along. That's all you can do. At the end of the day.
Fair point, mate. What's happening in your neighbourhood?
Oh, I'm sure you heard about that. I'm sure you heard about that shooting that took place almost a week ago now, several days ago.
Yeah.
Oh well, the chief of police.
I'm also hearing what's coming out with it. So, what's your take on it?
I think it's a natural conclusion to something that's to a system that's been bad from the very start. When you allow when you allow it's just like with the multinational citizen problem. When you allow people that aren't committed to one specific geographical area, and they have allegiances to multiple areas, they're going to naturally they're going to have their thoughts split between them. It's the same thing with the dual. It's the same thing we have with the problem with the dual Israeli citizenship. You know, where
I was just going to say it's the same with Israel, isn't it?
exactly it's the same thing with.
Yeah, you can't do it. You can't
exactly.
do it. I've got go on. Sorry, finish what you're saying.
Or at least these people can't do it, because let's be real here. These people, we're not talking about normal people like ourselves who are good-hearted. We're talking about evil psychopaths who only get into power because of the fact they're evil psychopaths, because they're chosen.
Wow, Alex, do you hear that? I mean, you're a normal.
I doubt that very much.
When I say really normal, I mean that we don't want to go around and start wars and eat babies and stuff like that. That's what I'm talking about.
Hang on, that is normal, isn't it? I don't know anymore. I don't know anymore. But I've got a video here that you might appreciate, Taylor, because it's stuff that you've spoken about a lot. But again, it's to draw this pattern to where we're at now. It's not just about what stuff is happened or happening. It's happened, and it's where we're at now. So it's interesting to get these stories out and to be able to speak about them.
Was the World War II narrative they taught me in school a complete lie?
Correct, Father, because the real fuse was lit after World War I when the 1919 Treaty of Versailles crushed Germany with debt, land losses, and military limits that wrecked its economy and pride.
How bad were those punishments exactly?
Germany lost about 13% of its territory, all overseas colonies, and had to pay 132 billion gold marks, which fueled hyperinflation by 1923, when a loaf of bread cost billions. Berlin became the Babylon of Europe, known for prostitution and even primitive sex change surgeries under the Jew Magnus Hirschfeld. The Frankfurt School was also operating in Germany at the time, and was the origin of critical theory and was responsible for spreading Marxism.
That's freaking brutal.
And misery breeds ideas, fat man. So people across Europe turned to communism, promising equality, which was countered by fascism, promising order, strength, and national rebirth during chaos. The communists briefly took over Hungary before being overthrown, and Spain went through a civil war. Italy had its own problems as well, which paved the way for Mussolini to rise to power.
So where does the Austrian painter fit in?
The Austrian painter gained prominence from writing Mein Kampf in prison following a failed coup. When he got out, he formed the NSDAP and gave the Germans an option that made them feel proud to be German again. He reformed the currency, completely revamped the military, began public works like the Autobahn highway system, and cleaned up Berlin. He made it a priority to help the poor and to outlaw usury, the Rothschild banking family, and Freemasonry.
How did the world respond?
After the loss of World War I, which many Germans blamed on Jews via the Balfour Declaration and the conditions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, the Germans and Jews were at odds with each other. In response to the Austrian painter being elected, internationally Jewish media began a smear and boycott campaign, most notably the headline, "Judea declares war on Germany." Jewish-owned media around the world began alluding to what they perceived to be a coming Holocaust. This was before any German aggression. Following the Jewish boycott, the Germans responded with a one-day boycott, which they agreed to drop if the other side did as well. Marxist groups were also strongly opposed to the new Germany, and the most notable one, Antifaschistische Aktion, known today as Antifa, was formed.
What about Poland?
Germany's tensions with Poland continue to rise for multiple reasons. One is that Poland had a large Jewish population, as it is a part of the region where the Ashkenazis originate from. The other is the land disputes following Versailles. Britain and France gave Poland defense guarantees, so the Poles felt they could act however they pleased, which led to the oppression of isolated Germans. The Germans did have a decent relationship with the Polish leader Piłsudski, but once he passed and his globalist predecessor Śmigły-Rydz took over, things began to fall apart. To deal with the rising tensions with the Jewish people, the Germans met with international Jewish interests and created the Havara Agreement, which allowed them to transport some of their Jewish population to Palestine, now known as Israel.
So how did this lead to war?
Austria saw the success Germany had and unified with it in what is known as the Anschluss. It is important to know that the primary concern of the Germans wasn't Judaism, but Marxism, which was a product of rabbinical Judaism. The Austrian painter's doctor was actually Jewish. At this time, the Germans were pursuing revisions to Versailles, which weren't very successful. Through the Munich Agreement, they were allowed to annex a part of Czechoslovakia. The Germans were not in agreement with the provisions of the Munich Agreement and ended up annexing all of Czechoslovakia, which further increased tensions. Also around this time, the Jewish author Emil Cohen wrote the book A New Holy Alliance, which pitted France, England, and the US against Germany, further driving the narrative.
And what about 1939?
1939. The beginning of World War II. After persistent Polish aggression towards the Germans had had enough. They signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviets known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. This was not an alliance, but rather an agreement not to attack each other. On September 1st, 1939, the Germans invaded Poland, demonstrating the extremely effective blitzkrieg or lightning attack. Roughly 2 weeks later, the Soviets would invade Poland from the east.
How did Britain and France react?
Following the invasion of Poland, the British and French declared war on the Germans, but took no action. This went on for a few years and was known as the Phony War. The interesting hypocrisy of it all is that the British and French did not declare war on the Soviets, who also invaded Poland at the time. The Soviets also invaded Finland and broke the non-aggression pact with the Germans by invading Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. The Germans sought peace with France and England originally, as the Austrian painter had a lot of respect for the British and claimed that the French and Germans had a rich history.
What was the U.S. doing at this time?
The US was set to stay neutral at this time, as over 90% of Americans did not want to get involved in another European war. The Freemasonic president, FDR, decided to break neutrality and sell arms to the Allies. It is important to note that many Jewish individuals were in Roosevelt's ear, most prominently Bernard Baruch and Henry Morgenthau. Morgenthau was responsible for suggesting the freezing of German bank accounts in France, further escalating relations between the countries. He was also the architect of the oppressive post-war Morgenthau Plan.
And then 1940?
1940 was the year that Chamberlain resigned and Churchill took over, immediately escalating the war the day he got into office. Churchill annexed Iceland and began bombing British cities to further escalate to total war. Around this time, Germany invaded France, the Netherlands, and Belgium, which didn't last long as they all surrendered quickly. Churchill's Jewish advisor, Lindemann, recommended they subject Germany to relentless carpet bombing.
Wait, so did Germany not want to go to war with England?
No. England bombed Germany first, and Churchill rejected all talks of peace. British troops were even trapped on Dunkirk, and many argue the Germans let them escape to encourage peace talks. They even sent Rudolf Hess to England to discuss peace, and they just locked him up for the remainder of the war.
What about Italy and Japan?
In 1941, Italy, Japan, and Germany formed what is known today as the Axis powers. The African theater also opened up that year. The Germans had also received reports that the Soviets planned a westward invasion of the rest of Europe known as Operation Groza. Though this claim is debated today, it is reinforced by the development of amphibious tanks by the Soviets, which many speculate were for invading England. They also noted that much of their army was designed for an offensive war rather than a defensive war, which made them susceptible to attack.
The truth about that came out.
In 1941, the US supplied the Soviets with roughly $150 billion worth of arms and equipment known as the Lend-Lease Act. Following this, the Germans initiated Operation Barbarossa as a preemptive strike to prevent the communist expansion into Europe. This was the largest invasion in human history. Though the Germans were outmanned, they still came within 20 miles of Moscow before being slowed to a halt by the Russian winter. It ended with the bloodiest battle in human history, the Battle of Stalingrad, which turned the tide and forced the Germans to retreat. Many argue that without the US military aid, the Soviets would not have been able to stop them.
What about the Pacific?
In the Pacific, the US had an oil embargo on Japan, and Roosevelt froze all of their assets, which many see as an attempt to provoke them while they were at war with China. The US also knew an attack was imminent, and some speculate that they knew they were going to attack Pearl Harbor, as a large amount of the US Navy was sitting ducks there. There are many quotes that claim they wanted to provoke Japan into firing first. After Pearl Harbor, the US was officially in the war.
How does it end?
In Europe, the Allies launched the D-Day invasion on June 6th at 6 a.m. or on 666, which many speculate about why they chose this, given this is a biblical number referring to the beast and the poor preparation of the beach by the Allied Air Force, leading to mass casualties. Though bloody, it established a foothold and began to force the Germans into retreat. The Germans were then in retreat on all sides, and in one final push, they fought at the Battle of the Bulge. The Allies would close in on Berlin, where the official story claims the Austrian painter offed himself after seeing Mussolini's fate. However, some evidence points to the fact that he was able to escape to Argentina with other members of the NSDAP. To end the war in the Pacific, the atom bomb was developed by the Jewish-American scientist Oppenheimer and used twice on civilians in Japan.
World War II was one of the most catastrophic events in human history and deserves serious consideration. However, that does not mean its narratives are beyond scrutiny or fixed in place. Motives and provocations matter, making it important to examine events critically, especially when parallels appear today. Atrocities committed by the Allies are often overlooked, which raises further questions. It is also important that no historical event, including an alleged genocide, is beyond debate. I will touch on these subjects in future videos.
I think that's one of the most important things that you do, Taylor, is you get debates going on these topics of information. We can debate details, and I love to debate the details. But the fact is that we've got all this wide open. And this is controlled. It certainly controlled my grandparents and my parents' world. Then I come along, that I can only be controlled from this point. So if we can't go back and ask these questions, particularly when it's illegal to do that, this is where we have to start with the digging.
Well, let me say this though. I would have actually I would have rather preferred you would have you would have paused at certain parts of this of the video, because there's a lot I wanted to comment on.
The problem is, Silla, if I paused it, we'd be here tomorrow morning while you
I mean, I guess you're not wrong. You're not wrong about that.
Yeah. So I know you can encapsulate it. So encapsulate it.
Well, that's the thing, is like there were so many different topics to mention right there. I wouldn't know where to start. Like, you know what? Let's go ahead and just start with the beginning. Okay, so we have the Treaty of Versailles, which by the way, I just want to mention that it should be known that after the Jewish led anarchists and quote unquote nationalists and Reds of the 19th century, when they assassinated Tsar Alexander II in 1881, there was known as the quote unquote pogroms. Essentially, a lot of Jews were being expelled from these from not just Russia, but a lot of these other countries, because they happened to be behind a lot of these assassination attempts and killings of politicians and monarchs and other prominent individuals during the 19th century. The 19th century was a huge, chaotic, bloody mess of a century, just killing of monarchs and politicians one after another. It became known as propaganda of the deed. You put out the word, someone should sacrifice themselves in order to get rid of a quote unquote tyrant, and then you have these disillusioned people who have nothing to live for. They go and they go and kill them, and they know they're going to get caught or killed in the process, but they don't care. It's about taking one for the team. This was very effective. They killed dozens and dozens and dozens of monarchs and politicians during that time, including American presidents. And that's just the overt ones with gunshots. It's not even counting the ones that were most likely poisoned. Anyway, after the killing of Tsar Alexander II, there was a huge expulsion of the Jews from Russia and a lot of these other European countries. Most of them went to two places. One was the United States, and the other was Germany. And in Germany, the Jews were actually treated very, very well. They were welcomed with open arms, especially when Kaiser Wilhelm II came to power in 1890. He ended up, or 91, I forget which year, and he was a bit more on the liberal side. He was he was okay with the idea of the Jews just being given citizenship and allowed to do whatever they want. Well, they ended up coming to regret that, because during World War I, we talk about the Jewish forces in the United States and in England, but it was also the same thing in Germany itself. During the final push after the Russian Revolution, after the invasion of the Jews in Russia, toppling the Tsar, and they pulled out of the war, Germany pulled one final offensive westward in order to end the war quickly before the United States troops could get into the war from proper. But the Jews in Germany then made their move. They started boycotts of industry, and they started putting bad negative stories in the newspapers in order to kill the morale at home, and essentially they did everything they could in order to hurt the German war effort at home. And that more than anything else is what caused Germany to lose World War I. They became known as traitors. I forget what they're called. The stab in the back. The stab in the back. It's people call it a conspiracy theory. No, it was real. These were thousands of Jewish people who owned the banks, they owned the newspapers, they owned the industries, they owned everything. because Germany was so kind to them. And guess what happened?
It
Because they
too,
want-
Brutus. It too, Brutus.
So they ended up making their move because they knew that if Germany lost, they would get communism, and they would be able to get their own state, the state of Israel. So they betrayed Germany from within, and that's how they lost. And the same thing happened in World War II, actually, except it wasn't the communists and the Jews that were behind that one. That in World War II, it was the old line aristocrats, the ones from the pre-World War I days, who they liked how Hitler was anti-communist and got rid of the Bolsheviks and saved Germany from going communist, but they hated Hitler's system of
Who liked that? Who liked that?
Say again?
Who liked that Hitler did that?
We're talking about the old line aristocrats, like the people who had a lot of money and wealth in Germany, who weren't Jewish. They were hardline Germany.
Yeah.
They liked the Kaiser and the old system. So they liked that.
I think that was the downfall, that they thought that they could go back to that system when
Exactly. They hated Hitler's egalitarian system of merit.
The Bolshevik Jews had already done their part. We don't hear about the amount of Christians that the Bolshevik Jews murdered. We're not taught that in the schools. We're taught a nice round 6 million figure, but now that's changed. It's absolutely changed. You've gone from 6 million to 3 to 2 point something to thousands now. Now, that's not.
But they still maintain that magical number of 6 million.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm getting to. We still have this maintenance of this fictional figure that doesn't exist now because of, let's call it science asking questions and making points. So we get down to the point where that's not true. So if the narrative isn't true and we're still running on it, what does that mean? Because we still have a narrative for the 7/7 bombings in England. The 740 train is what these bombers caught to get to London to then distribute and do all the rest. Yet the 20 to 8 train was cancelled. But the official narrative doesn't accept or acknowledge that. So the factor is, we've got a lie about the original narrative and people still do it. We've still got it with 9/11, where the BBC points at World Trade Center 7 and says, yeah, it's collapsed. Well, what's that one that stood behind you? So we've got this narrative that comes from all these points. So again, it's when we could debate about the rat run to Argentina and whether Hitler made that rat run or whether he didn't. It's going to be speculation. But the factor is there's a big flag planted in Argentina, and Jews seem to have part of that. We've seen land set on fire, and people are pointing at Israeli Jews who've caused this. Now, is this just because people are picking on Israeli Jews again? Or is there a reason? We've seen reasons because we've seen patterns. And this
when you get kicked out of 114 countries or whatever, I'm pretty sure
there's a reason, isn't there? There's a reason.
Yeah, it's like a kid who gets kicked out of. It's like a kid who gets expelled from school. It's like 1 or 2 schools. Okay, you can make the argument. Oh, they're racist. But 117 or whatever it is of them. Yeah, have fun. Have fun with that excuse, buddy.
Well, when you see coin clipping, I would never even thought of that. But shaving every gold coin. Let's shave every gold coin. So it's
exactly, and it's never for religious reasons.
It's only 98 pence of a pound gold.
Exactly, and it was never, and the thing, and pretty much every single time, it was not for religious reasons either. It was always from for economical reasons, because these people.
Well, you say that, but there were incidents where occultist rituals were discovered. And that was
Yeah, that's what I mean.
These aren't, and I have to stipulate, these aren't the Jews that we see in the Bible as being the promised people, the chosen people, whatever you want to call it. These are people who claim. These are people that Jesus even said, these are the ones who say the Jews, but they aren't. They are of the synagogue of Satan. So we've got the pattern, we've got the people, we've got the fundamentals.
Yep, it's the equivalent of me going around saying that I'm Webby. I'm Webby. Give me his bank account because I'm Paul Webster.
It's everything what these people are saying has a relevance, but it's in a different life. It's a different world. It's not true. It's all made up. So they have to keep that narrative spinning. They have to keep the world on their side because they're God's chosen people. And even, and I put in brackets, speech marks, even Christians say that Israel is where the chosen people live. It's not true. God's chosen people were scattered everywhere. And the Jews that went and established, and God said, I will have the land established, and uses the bad for the good. So we have to take this as a progression. But if you are going to throw your hat in the ring with any of these political parties or physical parties that claim something, then you better know what they're claiming. Because if you're not, you know better. You know better. You're just going along with it. Have you got anything to put onto that, Alex?
Not especially. I mean, in the past we talked about the Jewish thing till the cows come on. So it's not really. I don't think I have anything to add.
Well, Martin will have to visit the synagogue of Satan. Where do you think he could go to visit that?
Well, I mean, again, that look at that scripture. It's
Martin's got a flat in Iver.
Yeah, well, I mean, when John was exiled on Patmos and he's having this vision in 95, AD or CE, however you want to do it, there was a big influence from a Jewish contingent of believers in at that time. As we've said many, many, many times, virtually all believers were Jews who believed Jesus was the Messiah. Now, Paul's Gentile mission kicked in. A process of division was kicking in. The relationship to the Roman Empire and the protections that the Jews had was starting to become eroded after Nero. Christians became distinguishable from Jews, not just a sect of Jews. So all that synagogue of Satan stuff, you just can't go to the 21st century and say, well, yeah, the synagogue of Satan is a particular type of Zionist Ashkenazi Jew. I mean, people do that, but it's just not biblically tenable. So you've got to reconstruct what was going on around 95 AD. You've got to reconstruct what was going on in the split between Judaism and Christianity, which still was far from having fallen. I mean, the Bar Kokhba revolts, the wars 132 to 135 AD, and beyond that, before the Jewish diaspora really kicked in. So the Jerusalem church eventually died out. So it's not clear to me in the original context what John was specifically talking about, but it's probably Judaizing Christians. It's those Christians who were using, whether it be circumcision or whatever it was, and to basically take Christianity back into a kind of a bound sort of spirituality.
I can say that, but I think we're still there. I think we're still twanging. We're not springing away to look away from that. I think we seem to have found a happy place, if you like. The Jews that say the Jews but they're not are the ones who are saying that, well, we are the chosen people, then this is what we need to do. America seems to go for that. The English say, no, we're not, but then we let the Americans use our bases to bomb people. So we see that whatever is being said isn't the truth at all. It's just all hating people. It's all just saying, yeah, don't listen to what I'm saying, or listen to what I'm saying, or don't listen to what I'm saying. It's like, look in the eyes, round the eyes, not around the eyes, look in the eyes, not around the eyes. All that kind of stuff is trying to keep us somewhere. And I think if the smallest amount of people started to look, it was what we touched on earlier. The frequency has to change when people look. When the observer observes the reality, that frequency has to collapse into the vibration and frequency of the observer. And I think we're at like this point where, this is being, the world is being shook, Alex. Which frequency are you going to collapse? What are you looking at? What do you think is the truth? Who will disappear? People will think that Christians are going to just like go poof, disappear, and the pants come falling down from the sky. Again, this is all just made up stuff because it isn't scriptural, and scripture is the only truth that I've found. So whereas scripture tells us that all this stuff, what you've just been talking about then, Alex, is going on, scripture doesn't give us an answer because the answer is already given. It's just got to play out. Where are you, though? Where are you going to be in this part? Are you going to be distant, or are you going to be present? And I think that's challenging a lot of people's frontiers, if you like, where they're at in this world. I don't mean walking outside and seeing your front and seeing the pavement and the road. I don't mean that. I mean seeing what this world is, what you really living in. Because the world that I'm living in is not the world I was living in 40 years ago. Definitely. I felt it was a different world. People had different outlooks, but maybe it was just because people didn't see. People couldn't see. They weren't as apparent. Now we've got all the information. Ignorance is a real choice where we're at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that, no matter what type of Judaism that people talk about, the Jews thing, the ethnic things, largely a red herring. If you look at like the similarity between Judaism and Christianity over against all other religious constructions, God promises to liberate his people. And there's a continuity between the two of them. Obviously, the Exodus was the foundational historic memorial for Jews. Their identity was grounded in the Exodus, which was a God who was liberating them from oppression. And it just so happened that it was, the Egyptian pharaoh, several generations after the Joseph in his, as people call it, the Technicolor Dreamcoat. So the memory of God had faded in the eyes of the people, and ultimately the Jews, which at the time were the Hebrews, the Habiru, they'd been enslaved, and God called to recollection through Moses something that the people had forgotten in slavery, which was the God of their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, was going to liberate them. And of course, in that sense, he was going to liberate them from the experience of slavery and oppression on a daily basis that they were having in their lived reality now, and they doubted it, and there was lots of toing and froing, and we know the accounts of the plagues and the liberation and the supernatural aspect, but it was basically a liberation job. But then they went out to the wilderness and they wandered for 40 years because they started grumbling against God, and they'd been liberated from the external political oppressor who was oppressing them every day. But then God looked after them in the wilderness, and he fed them, he led them by day and by night. Obviously, a lot of people would call it mythological, but it doesn't matter how people read that specifically. He leads them at night with a pillar of fire, a pillar of cloud. And basically, they're wandering for 40 years until the promised land. Well, why is that? Because they're liberated from one form of external oppression, but then they started to grumble and they weren't content with being looked after by God in a very simple, modest way. But he had to knock the rough edges off, just like he did with Moses for 40 years. So you have to be shaped. That's the point. It's an ecology. If you're grumbling, liberation isn't just liberation from some tyranny. The biggest tyranny we impose is on ourselves. So that's a foundational moment within Judaism, its memory, its identity. And then Christianity, builds on that. And perhaps it's a more spiritual expression.
I think it's where it gets mixed up. Martin brings up a good point. All right, Martin says that it's just a Talmudic entrance in the Talmud that Jesus is burning in excrement in hell because he's not who he said he was. So yes, not all Jews think that. However, people who follow the rabbis and Judaism don't bother to read their own Torah. They don't bother to do things like that. They just, they have the bar mitzvah, they do what the rituals, and they think that that's it. They're just waiting for the Messiah. So I think there's a massive contradiction in that because when we say Jews don't believe in Jesus, well, Jesus was a Jew, and the disciples that was with him were all Jews. So it doesn't quite marry up to say something like that. However, these are the Jews that say they're Jews, but are not. And these were still there at Jesus' time. There were Pharisees, there were Sadducees, and the Noahide laws are still Pharisees. So this hasn't changed. So we've still got the Jews that aren't Jews. Doesn't mean they're all the same, but it's the same as not all, it's not all women can be men. Just some can be men, apparently. Well, we can't. None. No biological woman can ever become a man. And no biological man can ever become a woman. It doesn't matter how much you feel. And it doesn't matter how many people go, yeah, you're a bloody good bloke for a woman. It doesn't matter. It's not true. It's not real. It doesn't sit in the realms of reality. We have to create it. But that is man creating his own reality. That is Satan's work, to create our own world that we can all be in charge of. And we can't, because the creator of the world that holds it together, his spirit will not be with us forever. We're told of this. So, the more we go deeper and deeper into this, Alex, the more answers are blatantly obvious to me. Well, I've either been cut off or I've just ended the show with a devastating sentence.
It went quiet. It went quiet. It just went quiet. So I was wondering what had happened.
I just waited for you to react.
No, I didn't think I didn't quite catch the end of the sentence. But the thing is, the question about those who say they're Jews and are not. This is the point I'm making about the true Jews who may not have accepted Christ yet, they are still anchored in that authentic memory that God is the God who intervenes. Yahweh, that's Exodus 6, he names himself. Prior to that, he's been the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then the I am. But then the one who intervenes and redeems his people is Yahweh, from which we get Joshua, which is God is salvation again. But it's the God who intervenes. He comes into the situation and redeems his people. So he did it miraculously in the Exodus account on which Jewish identity is founded. And, Passover is connected to that and so on, which is, again, foreshadowing, just like Abraham sacrificing potentially Isaac when he was asked to and then didn't have to. Both of those traditions reflect or foreshadow a different sort of liberation of God's people by God. This is an inner liberation, so you can see the Exodus as an external liberation from external conditions of oppression, which doesn't liberate the human being from his own internal oppression, from his own iniquity, from his own self-aggrandizement. So, that first bit has the correct God, but in an incomplete mode, and Jesus fulfills it. And, all that grumbling we do on the inside, all that desire, again, to overturn Pharaoh, overturn Rome, boot the politicians, the corrupt politicians at Westminster, that would just give an external liberation. If we got the correct remedy, it would give an external corrective, but ultimately it wouldn't change us. So that's the thing that, Jesus and Christianity have in common. True Jews who've not accepted Jesus yet see God as the liberator, the one who intervenes and sets his people free. They just haven't recognized that he's done that through Christ. Well, that's the reality. And of course, what that points us to is exactly what the Jews were missing at the time in the wilderness. They were looked after, but they still didn't trust God. They didn't trust. So ultimately, this is what we're looking at. You either decide that this transformed life transforms you on the inside, renews you from the inside out, or you're waiting for some sort of external salvation, some external correction where you can go, oh, it's not me, it wasn't me, Your Honor, it was him, it's somebody else's fault. No, you got to get your own heart right. You get your own walk through life right. Nobody else can live your life for you. Nobody else can die your death for you. Nobody else can face the judgments for your conduct that you do. That's down to the individual soul. People will have to make a choice about their own conduct. And also, I think it's in 2 Corinthians 5, where it even says to Christians that Christians will stand, I think the Greek word is bema, it's the judgment seat of Christ. That's not for salvation and not salvation. That's to have the deeds weighed, good and bad. Yeah. So even Christians still face a judgment. The consequences of your life you lived, you'll get rewards or sanctions. And that's it, because justice and fairness
is based on. That's what all the religions are based on.
Yeah, but they've got the other bit missing.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. The world has got it nailed on all that, apart from what's missing.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's the dangerous thing. What is missing?
Yeah, exactly. Because a lot of people think Christianity just has a judgment for eternal life or eternal damnation, and they get obsessed about heaven and hell and moralizing about it and saying Christianity is barbaric because you're eternally punished for temporal sin. But there is this question that believers themselves are judged, and that tells you that, like when Moses was commanded to take off his sandals because the ground where he was standing was holy ground. That's what ecology, it's God's ecology, fear of the Lord, it's who's at the top of the food chain. If you are going to have a culture and ecology which is alive and works and propagates life, then you've got to have the right person, the right entity, the right being at the top of the pile. Like I said last week, when Nebuchadnezzar, as the king, got ideas above his station, he went out of his mind and became like an animal because power went to his head. And whenever you get that, it's the same with the Islamic position on theocracy. The Islamic position on theocracy is not theocracy. It's an ideology claiming that God will be in charge if the Islamic Caliphate is able to implement those Islamic ideas that God seemed to ordain in the Quran. That is not theocracy. That is human ideology in religious clothing.
I believe.
Yeah, the real theocracy is when Jesus comes and basically lives it and rules. And that's the difference. You know, there's no theocracy where a bunch of humans said, well, on God's behalf, I've got my loud hailer out. This is what his kingdom's going to look like, and we're going to impose that upon you. That's a theocracy without the theo. There's no God in the middle of it. It's just a claim about God and a set of rules. You know, that's what thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, is the hope of the believer, that a just God. But again, if we don't acknowledge the holiness of God, the centrality of God, and we don't have fear and reverence for the one who gave us life, well, you know, how can that be sustained? There's nothing holy about that. So we want conditions that work, that are ecologically conducive. That's why God doesn't want anyone to perish. That's why Jesus said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, because we were all lost once. We were all enemies of God. We were all in rebellion. We rejected our creator, and we lived as if we didn't have a creator, and we went our own way. And Jesus said, I've come to seek and to save that which was lost. The 99 sheep are safe. I've come for that one that's stranded on the hillside. That's love. So if people don't buy into that, well, they're going to buy into some other position that's ideological, and it's going to put a human being at the centre with their ideas. Good luck with that.
Point. That's exactly the point, because to have that idea, you cannot fall for this earthly messiah rubbish. To know the truth, you can't fall for the earthly messiah rubbish. Whereas so many have been built up for this earthly messiah because people want justice, Alex. You know, you're witness to what I've gone through in the last 20 years. Armed police stealing property of people. It happened last week. You know, for meters being changed, armed response attended. Didn't pull weapons, but they stood there with weapons. What is going on? We know what the truth is, but there is a truth that is being played out. And, you know, this is it's the wag dog, it's everything. It's the narrative that we're stuck in. Anyway, we've come up for 2 hours, more or less now, lads. Again, it's been an amazing conversation because it's organic. It's happening. Different things are happening every week that is moving this agenda forward. All we can do is shine the light on it, because we aren't a political party. We aren't this. We aren't that. We're just people who are trying to say, hey, do you not think this is a bit funny? Is it not a bit weird, this? Is this man not lying to you? Yeah, that man's lying. How do you know? Well, his lips are moving. Right, so he's lying. Yeah, but he's the best we've got. Well, that's interesting that it's the best we've got. So, Taylor,
yeah.
Have you got anything to wrap us up with, mate? When you're doing your watch parties, by the way, send me the link in the private group, because I don't always see the emails, so I can't share them if they're not in the group.
Okay, I'll do that then.
Share us where people can contact you and what is on your agenda.
Okay, so my I usually am on Rumble. I always upload at least once a day. So usually I'll do watch parties. Sometimes I'll do regular uploads. Depends on what I'm doing that day. Sometimes I get busy. And then there's it's called the Raconteurs Report. You can find it just by searching that up. You should be able to see the logo. And then it's the same thing with my Twitter account, exact same name. And then I do have a YouTube as well, but I don't really use it for anything right now because of the fact that it's like, well, I don't want to get deleted again, and I'm kind of tired of getting deleted. So, but you know, right now I've got nearly 300 followers on. Actually, no, I think it's nearly 400 followers now on on Rumble. Let me actually just check real quick so that way I can know for certain. Yeah, I got 398 followers. I'm almost at 400, so I'm doing pretty decently, I'd say.
Well, good. Well, like I
Yeah,
said,
good
if you actually advertised it, you might have a few more. Like I said, put your links in our private group, because like I said, by the time I got into the emails, mate, there's no point. Just put it in the. I don't mean saturate us, but I mean when you're posting stuff that you're doing, post a link so then I can share it. Because I know you said you're having trouble with your Facebook, but I'm always happy to share it, mate, even though I'm shadow banned.
All right, thanks. I appreciate that.
No worries, mate.
All right, well, I guess I'll see you guys later.
Yeah.
Yes. Stay in touch through the week, Taylor. Thanks for
Have a
coming
good
on,
week.
mate.
Have a
Yep,
good
and
one.
thanks again. And God bless, guys.
Catch you
Yeah,
later.
by the way, Taylor, you can always always on. I was going to say you can always interject rather than. I know he likes sitting there and listening, but you can always interject with us because we like the conversation. Well, I've got to play us out. Hang on. Taylor seems to come back. What you back?
Sorry, were you trying to tell me something?
Yeah, I was just trying to say that you can always, when me and Alex are talking, you can always interject. You can always give us a signal that you want to say something. We don't.
I'm just afraid of being rude and cutting you off.
Yeah, no, but me and Alex get talking. We get lost in conversation. So even if you just say, "Hey, can I say something?" It doesn't mean you're interrupting. It's about conversation, Taylor. It's not about always teaching or educating. It's about conversation. So we appreciate the input that you have, Taylor, because you're doing your research. Whether we agree or disagree on some levels, it doesn't matter because you're doing it and you're bringing it to the table so that we can pick it apart as what we do as well. So that's all I was saying, mate. I would just appreciate what you do and keep up the work, man.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
And find our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
Of course.
God bless.
He is our. Yep. God bless. All right.
He
See you guys later.
is. He certainly is. God bless indeed. So, Alex, would you like to play the video first, and then you can wrap up?
Yeah, play a video first. Yeah, sounds like a plan.
What is it about humanity that wants to go to all the details and stuff and listen? You know, these guys like Fauci get up there and start talking. You know, he doesn't know anything really about anything, and I'd say that to his face. Nothing. The man thinks you can take a blood sample and stick it in an electron microscope, and if it's got a virus in there, you'll know it. He doesn't understand electron microscopy, and he doesn't understand medicine. He should not be in a position like he's in. Most of those guys up there on the top are just total administrative people, and they don't know anything about what's going on the bottom. You know, those guys have got an agenda, which is not what we would like them to have, being that we pay for them to take care of our health in some way. They've got a personal kind of agenda. They make up their own rules as they go. They change them when they want to, and they smugly, like Tony Fauci, does not mind going on television in front of the people that pay his salary and lie directly into the camera. You can't expect the sheep to really respect the best and the brightest. They don't know the difference, really. I mean, I like humans. Don't get me wrong, but basically, the vast majority of them do not possess the ability to judge who is and who isn't a really good scientist. I mean, that's the problem. That's the main problem, actually, with science, I'd say, in this century, because science is being judged by people. Funding is being done by people who don't understand it. Okay, who do we trust? Fauci. Fauci doesn't know enough to, you know. If Fauci wants to get on television with somebody who knows a little bit about this stuff and debate him, he could easily do it because he's been asked. I mean, I've had a lot of people president of the University of South Carolina asked Fauci if he'd come down there and debate me on the stage in front of the student body, because I wanted somebody who was from the other side to come down there and balance because I felt like, well, these guys can listen to me, but I need to have somebody else down here that's going to tell me the other side. But Fauci didn't want to do it.
How interesting is that Fauci, who was the front runner with AZT medication for AIDS in the early 80s, that we now look at that medication saying that that is what killed the majority of these people. So we're looking already at some medication and a virus that was manufactured, and now we're seeing for this. And we see Carrie Mullis, who created the PCR test, that he said don't use this for diagnostic reasons because that's not what it's for. And yet we locked up entire nations for 2 years nearly based on these made up things, Alex. So we see people at the front runner saying that you must listen to me. Carrie Mullis is saying don't listen to him because look at all these people that are saying things against him. We've got that throughout all this. We've got a Fabian society that says this is what we do. This is what we want. This is how we do it. And these are our people that are in those places to do it. Where do we go then, Al?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's funny because what you've that little reel at the end, I didn't know what it was going to be, but yeah, it chimes in with what I was thinking to say, and you know, it's about authoritative voices, really, and you know, generally speaking, we get people in positions of power that get appointed and become authoritative, and then everybody sort of bows down to them, and that's all she wrote. You don't get any pushback after that. They're just installed, and people have to accept a top-down approach. And you know, for me, that is not something that is ever going to end well. So, what I was going to talk about before you played that was, you know, this recent book that I'm sort of toying with, and I've mentioned Ecclesiastes before, is again, that book questions everything. And it says, you know, these established sources of authority that we all seem to go along with, they do need to be questioned. And in the case of Ecclesiastes, he's looking at a tradition that's established within Israel, Jewish spirituality and faith, which had a long history, and it was largely driven by this law-based perspective of right and wrong. And there are a set of rules, and when you follow those rules, then everything will turn out okay. So you've got people in the international community talking about the rules-based order. Follow the rules. Follow the science. There's always somebody at the top of the tree connected with a quango who's a voice piece, you know, for a government or a quango. They're all in bed together, and they cascade down a top-down point of view that everybody's supposed to follow. We say jump, you say how high. So that's what you're seeing with the whole Fauci thing, that at the end everybody turns it around and says, oh, I can't believe Fauci, and some people were calling him out from the beginning, and now the heat's on and he's being questioned intensively, and he pleads the Fifth Amendment. And again, it's the same old cycle trotted out over and over and over again. You know, it could be him, it could be Bill Gates, somebody set up who's clearly not qualified. They're set up as an authority, they become the voice of expertise. You had it with that guy over here at Oxford, I can't remember his name now, when COVID came out. He just, the so-called authoritative source, and everybody follows him. That's it. No questions to be asked after that. It's doctrine, it's dogma. And that, again, why Ecclesiastes is important is because people question political authority. They're skeptical. But, you know, when you've got a system that has said, this is what God has said, this is how God has appointed things to take place, you know, and this is the true God, people go, well, it's the true God, it's the right system. This is much better than some arbitrary political setup or ideology. But no, even within the Old Testament canon, Koheleth, the preacher, is undermining the conventional wisdom. He's not saying it's wrong. It's not wrong. It's incomplete. So when you take an incomplete system and you make it provide cliched answers that cover every base, and you say there's nothing new under the sun, and that means that you don't need to think about anything because we can just keep following the same pattern over and over again. No, there is nothing new under the sun. We've seen various species of the same issue, but that's all the more reason why we need to think differently about it and not accept the sacred cows that get passed onto us, even if they allege to be from the mouth of God, about God, signed, sealed, and delivered. No, you've still got to test it. Is this wise? Does it work over time? Is it, you know, so when you look at Christianity, is it really bringing about what it claims? Is the caliber of people in churches really what Jesus envisaged? And if it isn't, you can't just carry on with the same assumptions. You've got to start asking some critical questions like, what are we doing wrong? What are we missing? What are we failing to see? Because the point of all these systems is that they're there in terms of faith to propagate the divine life and ecology, and in terms of politics, that public servants ensure that we have the best possible chance by enacting policy of making people's life conditions as conducive as possible so that everybody can flourish. So it doesn't matter at what level you address it. These are all ecological questions about maximizing on human life, quality of life and experience that gets deranged. And if we don't ask critical questions, even of our most sacred holy cows, then we'll just follow a leader. We'll trust anything that we're told. So it doesn't matter what domain that's in. You've got to have a critical spirit, and I mean in the best sense, not unduly negative, but read between the lines, ask the question, and make sure that your own hands are clean, and make sure that you live what you claim.
And that's why 45 years ago, Margaret Thatcher's speeches make so much sense in this era. Yet she was saying things to bolster her own stuff way back then because she carried a narrative. She didn't carry this narrative. The Labour Party didn't carry this narrative. But the problem that we have now is we have Labour in charge. We have a Prime Minister with no mandate other than the Labour manifesto. We're going to argue about things that aren't in that manifesto that doesn't matter. And so will Farage and so will Lowe. They'll argue those points as well. And that's why we have to then decide, is getting involved back with voting the answer? Can we change things? Or is that simplicity of going into an establishment with the order to change it, like going into the Catholic Church to make it more about Jesus than Satan or Lucifer, whichever one of those parties you want, because Satan is not Lucifer and Lucifer is not Satan. We see it in Scripture, yet we believe a narrative. We need to grow.
Absolutely.
We need to grow. Thanks to everybody in the chat that's been with us all.
I was gonna read a bit of scripture actually, Paul, because I thought it was important, but I've almost. Oh yeah, hopefully people are cool with this, but I'm just going to read a bit from Ecclesiastes just to put a cherry on it. So part of chapter 7 and part of chapter 9. It's not very long. The part of chapter 7 is just like 3 verses. Behold, I have discovered this, says the preacher, adding one thing to another to find an explanation, which I am still seeking, but have not found. I have found one man among 1,000, but I have not found a woman among all these. Behold, I have found only this, that God made men upright, but they have sought out many devices. Great starting point, that. Exactly, they've all gone their own way. And then he says in chapter 9, whatever your hand finds to do, verily do it with all your might, for there is no activity or planning or wisdom in Sheol where you are going. I again saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, and the battle is not to the warriors, and neither is bread to the wise, nor wealth to the discerning, nor favour to men of ability, for time and chance overtake them all. Moreover, man does not know his time, like fish caught in a treacherous net, and birds trapped in a snare, so the sons of men are ensnared at an evil time, when it suddenly falls on them. And this I came to see as wisdom under the sun, and it impressed me. There was a small city with few men in it, and a great king came to it, surrounded it, and constructed large siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he delivered the city by his wisdom. Yet no one remembered that poor man. So I said, wisdom is better than strength, but the wisdom of the poor man is despised, and his words are not heeded. The words of the wise, heard in quietness, are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. There you go.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks to everybody in the chat who stayed with us.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you for all you who are listening on the catch up. The messages that I've got from people who encourage us to keep talking about this stuff is because people want the truth, and you know that's all we want. We've never wanted to be right. We've only ever wanted the truth. Right, God bless, guys. See you next week.
Good night, guys.
In the daily news we read, from strange media panics to the paths where agendas lead. They look at 15-minute cities and how resources are controlled, where elites treat everyday people like numbers bought and sold. Then Webby brings up history to uncover how it grew, exposing slow infiltration and the Fabian society view. The dreams and visions by the standard of the word, refusing to be blinded by the noise the world has heard. For Webby Alex and Taylor stand upon the truth alone, unveiling human systems till the godly path is shown. Webby talks of bureaucracy quietly taking over space, while individual responsibility is what culture should embrace. Social justice sounds appealing, but it fixes things in state, removing personal duty while the government grows greed. Teach your children what it costs before the freedom fades away. Because true social action isn't what the leftists say. Taylor cuts through popular theories to see where scripture leads, checking end times traditions against actual faith and deeds. Alex warns that intellect can build a model out of fear, while the devils also believe, yet refuse to hold God dear. Human governments will fall, souls hubris prove the cost. Without the law upon our hearts, true direction will be lost. They test the dreams and visions by the standard of the word, refusing to be blinded by the noise the world has heard. For Webby Alex and Taylor stand upon the truth alone, unveiling human systems till the godly path